I mean, have you checked the price anytime recently?
No, so I'm happy to give the backstory.
Yeah, do. I love it.
So it all originated. I think it was the end of 2021, if I remember correctly. My years might be wrong because things are just moving so quickly. But it's been 3 years. But basically, I'd put a tweet out, and I'm not heavily followed. I have probably back then I had maybe even like 1,000 or 1,500 followers. Now I have like 3,000. By no means popular or famous, and I'm happy to keep it that way. But I put a tweet out and basically said, and I'm not a gambling man either, but I did say, hey, would anyone like to take a bet? Not an actual put money on the table bet, but just a friendly bet in terms of how long we could go not checking the price of Bitcoin in dollar terms. And I basically said, I'm aiming for 12 months. Anyone in? And again, to prove my point about not being famous, not a single person replied to that.
That tumbleweed meme.
Yeah, kind of... basically. Yeah, basically. Not that I was expecting it, but I thought, I'll put it out there. I've kind of used Twitter more or less as like a personal diary. I don't really care who's there and who's engaging, who's watching. It's just there for my own thoughts. I mentioned earlier, I'm a big thinker, so I like to put those thoughts onto paper, so to speak. But anyways, fast forward, I started doing it, and I started sort of doing monthly like blogs, I guess you could say, kind of tracking my experiences. Day 4, unfortunately, I saw a chart, but now I've learned that I should be like muting certain keywords on my social channels to avoid that. So it was a bit of a learning experience.
Yep.
It wasn't perfect to begin with, of course, when you're fully in the Bitcoin ecosystem. It's hard to avoid the price, but over time I learned certain mechanisms, muting words and scrolling past charts really quickly and just not engaging. And also what ended up happening was a lot of people didn't take me seriously to begin with, which is fair enough. I don't even know if I took myself seriously, but I really wanted to give it a go as an experiment to see if I could actually do it. And after a few months of people kind of jokingly saying, "Oh, hey, Chris, the price of Bitcoin is 25,000." Ha ha ha.
Gotcha.
And then I'd remind them like, "Hey, that's funny, but I'm actually serious. I do want to try to avoid it. And look, I can't tell you what to say or what to do, but if we're going to converse, out of respect, it would be great if you could try that. Like, try not to talk to your other friends about it, but when we discuss between ourselves, that's not a topic I want to cover." Eventually people kind of started catching on and actually being quite respectful about it and saying, like, I jump on calls now and people would be talking about price, and then they'd see me join, and then they say, "Oh, we'll pick this conversation up later," which is actually quite nice and accommodating. So we've come a long way. But basically I reached the year. I got to the end of the year. I think it was 2023 or 2022. And I basically said, okay, cool. I made it more or less. I had a few hiccups along the way just from the learning of it all. But more or less, I didn't actively go out there and check it. And, I come from a place where I've been in Bitcoin for 10 plus years. I was madly refreshing CoinMarketCap and my portfolio trackers and all that sort of stuff, like most people do when they're first starting out, right? What happened in that last 10 minutes, as if it matters. And that was one of the things I wanted to try to solve, because it doesn't matter. Bitcoin helps lower your time preference. Before I got into Bitcoin, I didn't even know what time preference meant. So we've come a long way, so to speak. But I got to 12 months and then I thought, this is actually quite nice. It does remove a lot of the noise and a lot of the stress and the anxiety and the volatility, I guess, of having to check the price and stress about because when you're heavily exposed like I am, a volatile swing can change your net wealth overnight significantly. But to me, it didn't matter because we're measuring in the wrong instrument and we're looking at it in the wrong time preference. So I got to 12 months and I thought, okay, let's keep going and do 2 years. And then I did 2 years and kind of was getting really polished in the way that I just didn't even think about it. I think they say it takes about 21 days to create a habit. I mean, maybe a habit of this regard takes a little longer, but I was fully into the idea of not checking the price, and I'm still going. It's like over 3 years now. So, into the 4th year now. I did find out the price once we hit that big milestone. That was one of the things that was completely unavoidable. Hitting 100K, I think it was late last year sometime, maybe November, December, I can't remember exactly, but it was just like as if fireworks erupted globally. It was like you couldn't not know that it hit 100K, regardless of how you'd have to lock yourself in a cave or something.
Well, and especially when all your mates are into Bitcoin too as well.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it was really unavoidable. But in terms of where we're at now, I can assume we're around that mark, but I don't know. Like we could be below it, we could be up, but the point is it doesn't matter. Actually read this. Measuring Bitcoin in dollars is like measuring the future using a tool from the past, which I thought was quite nice. I used to say measuring Bitcoin in dollar terms was like going outside and trying to measure the air temperature, but using a tape measure. It's just like they're totally incompatible. You're using the wrong tool to measure the wrong metric. And that's kind of how I view looking at fiat dollar value of Bitcoin. It just doesn't make sense. It's not a useful metric. Lots of people argue, but it brings so many people to Bitcoin and number go up is the best marketing tool. And I'm not refuting any of those things. And people are more than welcome to talk about the price and do whatever the hell they want. But for me, my personal stance is the most important thing for me is how do I keep Bitcoin secure and within my family for the next 100 years? Everything else is, it doesn't matter. Bitcoin could go to zero. It could go, well, if it goes to zero, then I guess it doesn't matter because I'm holding something worthless. But at this point, I think we can all agree that it's not going to zero. But if it goes to 50,000...
Very, 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 very unlikely.
It's very unlikely. Yeah, it's very unlikely.
We're more likely to drop dead as individuals than Bitcoin go to zero, from some freak accident.
Exactly. And that's more important to me because if I drop dead tomorrow, what happens to my Bitcoin? Right? I need to have the mechanisms in place to make sure that it goes to where I want it to go. My family, my kids, all that sort of stuff. So that's more important to me. So by checking the price of Bitcoin is simply distracting me from my main goal, which is keeping it secure for 100 years. And we're talking beyond my own lifetime. I'm certainly not going to live to 135, right? Not without some technological advancement that we don't yet know about. So yeah, all of these things to say that it just creates a lot of stress, a lot of noise, a lot of anxiety, a lot of volatility that just isn't required for, I guess, my personal level of conviction with Bitcoin. It's going to every number you could possibly imagine. It's going to go, well, it's already been from 0 to 100,000. It's going to go from 100,000 to 200 to 300 to 400 to 500 to 1 million to 5 million. Like at this point, I don't really have all that much doubt. Of course, I could be wrong, but I'm living under the conviction lens that it is going to do all those things. And if it does, then how am I going to keep that safe throughout that period?
Oh my gosh, Chris, so many cool things to touch on there. When you don't check the Bitcoin price, like how do you do your accounting in day-to-day life? So are you running totally on a Bitcoin standard where you're getting paid in Bitcoin and you only spend using Bitcoin? Or do you still have a fiat bank account that you're using for like everyday life? What would be some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in order to do that smoothly and not get caught out every day?
That was also part of the experiment as well. As it stands currently, I do have a fiat income. So it's changed a little bit since prior years. So now it's like I do have a bank account and I have fiat inflow. And that's the first thing to go outflow because it's devaluing constantly. So the incentive model is get rid of your fiat, hold on to your Bitcoin. But previously, earning Bitcoin, saving in Bitcoin and spending in Bitcoin, being totally in the circular economy, then there is no requirement to more or less have a bank account or to think about fiat. The way that I look at it was how many sats am I spending to acquire the thing that I need? Am I spending more sats or am I spending less sats over time?
Interesting. So the
thing that I need is more or less stable.
It's a sat to thing exchange rate rather than
correct
a thing to dollars to sats. Yeah. Okay,
obviously, there's inflation in those things. So the cost of bread and the cost of groceries and petrol and all that stuff's going up over time, but it's not happening insanely in front of our eyes. It's happening slowly over time. I would see trends. I would say, okay, well, 2 years ago or 6 months ago, this $100 purchase used to cost me 55,000 sats, whatever the number is. Now it costs me 48. That's interesting. But that would suggest to me that the price of Bitcoin is going up in dollar terms. But what's more interesting is I'm noticing my purchasing power going further along. That's exactly what I want to be happening. The opposite happens in fiat. That dollar or that $100 that used to buy you that bag of groceries now costs $200, and you've got the same amount of groceries. the quality of the groceries haven't changed. It's the exact same products, but on a fiat standard, you're seeing the reverse occur compared to the Bitcoin standard. So that was the way that I sort of measured it, if you want to think about it, was just noticing my purchasing power increase over time.
Yeah, makes sense.